Welcome, everyone. I'm Michele Cobb, publisher of AudioFile magazine, the #1 source for audiobook reviews in the world. And today, I'm here with David Timson, crime fiction narrator extraordinaire. David has recorded numerous audiobooks for Naxos AudioBooks, including the complete Sherlock Holmes stories, 5 Charles Dickens novels, and a complete unabridged reading of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. During his time working with Naxos as director, actor, and writer, David has also directed 5 of the successful audio series of Shakespeare's plays. And in 2002, he won the Audiobook of the Year award for his reading of A Study in Scarlet. Last year, David joined Behind the Mic alongside Rupert Degas to celebrate Naxos' 30th anniversary, and we're delighted to have him back. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's very kind of you to invite me.
Well, there's so much to talk about because you've done so many things. You recently recorded 3 novels by Anthony Berkeley, also known as Francis Iles, and contributed to another read by Jonathan Keeble. Could you tell us more about his work and why it's important, and which novel was your favorite? Give us a little insider information.
Yes, well, Anthony Berkeley is one of those forgotten detective writers, gathering dust on the shelves. Sadly, very few people read him today or are aware of him. But in his day, he was extremely popular. And his day was really the 1920s, 1930s, up to the Second World War and into the 1950s and beyond even. So he was quite a prolific writer, and his appeal and why he's been taken off the shelf by Naxos is that his approach to writing about detectives is rather unusual and outside the format that had become rather fixed by the 1920s by people like Agatha Christie. In the novels that I've recorded for Naxos, although there are official detectives on the cases, the story is seen often through the criminal's eyes. We see the murder and motivations from his point of view. And this is also in the style of a subtle vein of humor, rather dark humor sometimes. So he has a very unique approach to writing detective stories. He was also fascinated by the intricacies of the legal process, and most of his novels include an intriguing court scene looking at the paradoxes and dilemmas of a court case. Certainly the 2 of the 3 that I read had brilliant court scenes in them. His main detective was that he created was Roger Sheringham, but I didn't read any of his books, although he appears in 10 books written by Anthony Berkeley. But I think it was a shame he didn't develop the other amateur detective that he created, which I did read, which was Mr. Chitterwick. And he's only in 3 of his novels. And he's a sort of fussy, middle-aged bachelor living with his maiden aunt in Chiswick and is very much under her thumb, except when he stumbles across a crime in the wake of his everyday life, as he does, like, for instance, in Piccadilly Murder. While he's sitting having a cup of tea in the Piccadilly Hotel, a murder takes place on the table next to him. So it's rather intriguing, and that he seems to find crime wherever he goes. He's a bit like Miss Marple in some respects, unassuming generally, but with a very sharp mind when it comes to crime. Anthony Berkeley also founded the Detection Club in the 1930s, and all the leading detective writers of the day became members. The first president was G.K. Chesterton, and Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers were among the founding members. I don't think it was a particularly serious club. I think it was more an excuse for a good dinner and a good gossip. It is still in existence and is therefore really Berkeley's enduring legacy. So I say bravo to Naxos for giving him another chance. All the novels I read I thought were very entertaining and intriguing, but my favourite is definitely Malice Aforethought, which is very modern when you read it. You can't believe it was actually written in 1931. It feels like a modern detective novel, and is also something of a psychological thriller. As I say, the main character in it, who is the murderer, is focused upon. And I think it's generally believed amongst anyone who reads detective fiction that the opening sentence of Malice Aforethought is probably one of the best, if not the best, in all detective fiction. And I'm just going to read you the opening sentence so that you see what I mean.
Excellent, please
It,
do.
it was not until several weeks after he had decided to murder his wife that Dr. Bickley took any active steps in the matter. That's it. I think it's wonderful the way it lures you in to the story, hooks you in. Is he going to kill his wife, or will he change his mind, or what will happen? Will he get caught, or will he escape? Those in that first sentence, all those questions are raised for you.
Well, that's the beauty of a great book. It grabs you in that first line, right?
Absolutely, yes. So that's what I have to say really on Anthony Berkeley, I think, for the moment.
Excellent. You have also read, as I mentioned in your bio, the entire Sherlock Holmes canon for Naxos. Which stories did you enjoy the most and why? And how did you prepare to read so many titles?
Yes. Well, I mean, it sort of came about by accident, really. I was asked by Nicholas Soames, the founder of Naxos AudioBooks, to read some random adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And I think it was 1997, a long time ago. I think it was about my second job ever for Naxos. And I recorded 6 random stories, as I say, from the adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And after we'd recorded them in discussion over a cup of coffee, Nicholas suddenly said, "Let's do all the Holmes stories." Very spontaneous he is. He suddenly leaps up and comes out with something like that. So I was then committed to recording the entire canon, which is 54 short stories and 4 novels. And the whole project took 10 years to complete. Not because I was working on it all the time, because I was doing other work elsewhere, theatre work and so on. But we recorded, I think, a couple of selections a year, and it took 10 years to get through the whole lot. And of course, I have to say it was one of the high points of my life. It was the most fantastic thing to have been asked to do, and I should be ever grateful to Nicholas for asking me. I'd read some of the stories as a teenager, but I didn't know many of them at that stage. And Nicholas had also asked me to write the sleeve notes, so I realized there's going to be a massive amount of research on my part to do that. And there are thousands of books written about Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. And after 10 years of reading, to help me write the notes, I was pretty much an expert on Sherlock Holmes. And I was asked to give a talk to the Sherlock Holmes Society. And I also appeared at the Oxford Literary Festival in the early 2000s to do a different talk on Conan Doyle's knowledge of forensics. So, there are lots of spin-offs from recording these fantastic stories. It was a wonderful time. And getting to know the stories was a really rewarding experience. And it's a shame, that Conan Doyle didn't value his creation more, because he thought of Holmes as a good means of making money, but it was light literature to him. He wanted to be remembered for his historical novels, which he thought were the best writing that he produced, but over which we'll draw a veil. My favorite Holmes stories, well, The Speckled Band, I think, which actually turns out to be Conan Doyle's favorite story too. Speckled Band is a fabulous story, but the ones I really enjoy are the last one called The Final Problem, where Doyle attempts to kill off his hero. This one and the sequel to that, The Empty House, dealing with Holmes's death and resurrection, are brilliant in their invention, and they keep up the dramatic tension of events from the very beginning through to the very end. It's really fine writing by anyone's standards, I think, except, of course, for the man who actually wrote them.
Well, you have really worked on some of the top detectives, and now you're currently working through the Lupin canon, having recorded 6 books with another one, The Teeth of the Tiger, on the way. So, for those of us who don't know who Lupin is, who is he and how does he compare to Holmes? And, I'm curious, who would win a battle of wits. Could Holmes ever outsmart and capture Lupin?
Well, Arsène Lupin was created by Maurice Leblanc in 1905, which was at the height of the Sherlock Holmes craze. So Maurice Leblanc is contemporary with Conan Doyle. Leblanc, though, obviously wanted to create a detective figure completely different and opposite, indeed, to Holmes, and not without a touch of satire aimed at Sherlock Holmes and the stories. Lupin's an interesting, eccentric character. He's inclined to be on both sides of the law, sometimes at the same time. By profession, he is a master thief. And in fact, the first book of the Lupin stories is called Arsène Lupin, Master Burglar. He has an extensive gang spread all over Paris. He's a really big-time thief. And in fact, really, thinking about it, he's more like a copy of Holmes's arch rival, Professor Moriarty, than Holmes himself. He's really a bit of a villain at the beginning of the books. He stages spectacular robberies and eludes the police at every turn. Even when he's caught and put in prison, he manages to escape. As the novels progress, however, Lupin decides to change sides for no particular reason, it doesn't seem, and work with the police. And at one point, he disguises himself, indeed, as the chief of police, sustaining the deceit for several years. As you can probably tell by the way I'm describing these stories, the best way to describe them is that they are fantasies, really. Lupin loves to disguise himself. He's always changing his appearance, and sometimes he appears as a Russian prince or a Spanish grandee, just because I think mainly he likes disguising himself. They don't necessarily add very much to the plots. And the plots get more fantastic and incredible as they go on. In opposition to Holmes, Lupin falls passionately in love on a regular basis. Every novel he falls in love with a new young lady. That's very much part of his world, his life, and his personality. Now, in 1906, Leblanc cheekily introduced Sherlock Holmes into one of the Lupin short stories. Conan Doyle was absolutely furious and he threatened legal action. So Leblanc's response was to reintroduce Holmes in another two stories, only as Herlock Sholmes. He is presented by Leblanc as an arrogant and rather full of his own self-importance and not very effective in his deductions. And he's accompanied by his bumbling colleague, of course, called Wilson, not Watson. There are physical encounters between Sholmes and Lupin in the stories. He, as I say, appears in three of the stories, Sherlock Holmes, or rather Herlock Sholmes. But of course, Lupin always gets the better of Sholmes. So there's no chance, I'm afraid, that Leblanc is going to allow Sherlock Holmes in his other name to win over. So it's no wonder really that Doyle was so angry that he makes fun, Leblanc makes fun of Sherlock Holmes in the Lupin stories. But of course, Lupin must always triumph, which he generally does. There are 17 Lupin novels and 39 short stories featuring Lupin, and so far I've only done 6. They are very challenging to read, I will say, but they're always rewarding. So I hope that this series from Naxos will long continue. Only another 11 novels to go and 39 short stories. Anyway, one can always hope.
I will definitely hope, that's for sure. So I keep saying it because you've really read so many of the great detective novels. Your catalog of crime novels spans from Gaboriau, Monsieur Lecoq, Lecoq being the first police detective in fiction, up to Holmes, and then Anthony Berkeley and Chesterton's Father Brown. What recording are you the most proud of and why?
Well, I think the Holmes canon, all the Holmes stories, to be honest, is what I'm most proud of. It was a wonderful achievement, as I've said, and I found that my respect for Conan Doyle grew as I made my way through the stories. They're so well constructed. And I would recommend them to anybody as an introduction to detective fiction in general, because so much of what Conan Doyle wrote, the style, the structure of his stories, was copied by other writers and still is to this day, in fact. I think the most challenging to read have been the Father Brown stories by G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton has a philosophical approach to detection, and Father Brown is a Roman Catholic priest. And although he is very clever at solving crimes, he's really more interested in saving the soul of the perpetrator than having him arrested. So he's a very unusual detective, and the mood of many of the stories is philosophical, metaphysical, almost surreal, in fact. You don't feel they're really rooted in today or the time when they were written in the first half of the 20th century, but that they're more imaginative. And some of them I remember thinking at the time, this reads like a medieval story or a story set in a strange fantasy land. And a very, very different type of detective to Sherlock Holmes. So they're a good sort of contrast to read the Father Brown stories. Chesterton himself struggled all his life with his faith. He was a converted Roman Catholic, and he said the writing of the Father Brown stories had solved a lot of dilemmas for him. But I would also recommend Gaboriau's Monsieur Lecoq, which was written in the 1860s, the first French detective story, really, with early references to forensic examination, which was then a very new science in the 1860s. And it isn't just the police work that is intriguing in the Lecoq stories, but they're also tremendous adventure stories. They're quite long, some of them, but they're worth reading. He likes to go back to the beginning as to why a crime was committed and show in the history of the family and the events that happened before the crime how it came about and why. So a very interesting writer and a great influence on Conan Doyle and pretty well every detective fiction writer since.
With all these amazing reads under your belt, are there any mysteries where the resolution completely surprised you?
Well, I mean, I have to say the Lupin novels, as I was saying earlier, are so bizarre, with so many twists and turns that the final resolution is often completely unpredictable, and it does go off in directions you don't expect. But I think this adds to their enjoyment. I mean, it's it's a sort of fantasy journey, really.
Now, you've read a lot of crime detective novels, so how do you think you would fare as a detective?
Right. Well, to be honest, I wish I had the right kind of brain to be a detective. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, wrote a number of early detective stories, only three actually, in fact. And he dug up an old word for his detective, which describes his methods, ratiocination, which basically means the logical deductions made from facts and not suppositions. So if you're good at crosswords and possess the skill of lateral thinking, well, you might very well be a good detective, but that's not me, I'm afraid. I'm not very good at that sort of thing. And Conan Doyle, was asked to assist the police on a number of occasions to solve crimes, notably Jack the Ripper. But I'm afraid he wasn't able to offer any solutions. I think people thought that Conan Doyle was really Holmes, but in fact he was really Watson.
So now all these audiobooks that you've read, you are also currently recording a podcast series for Naxos AudioBooks covering the history of English crime fiction. Tell us some more about that.
Yes, well, it's a fascinating story. The development of well, in fact, I'm concentrating on the fictional English detective or English fictional detective rather than crime in general, because I want to see how the individual characters evolved from the very earliest onward. It's interesting, as I say, a fascinating story because it was quite a struggle for detective fiction to get itself established in the United Kingdom. mainly because in the early 19th century, England was a pretty lawless country, and it led to the first police force being founded in 1829, followed by the detective branch in 1842. So there were no police or detectives until 1842. And from the very beginning of their founding, the detectives were distrusted by the public. There was something they felt there was something shifty about them because they mixed with criminals, as of course detectives have to find out what's going on in the criminal world. And they asked personal questions of suspects. They watched people surreptitiously, and they followed people about. So they weren't seen to begin with, the real detectives, this is, as heroes. And so it was difficult to make a detective a fictional hero. Ironically, the story of the English fictional detective, therefore, begins actually in France during the latter part of the French Revolution. And so my podcast will follow the twists and turns of the journey, using extracts from the Naxos catalogue to chart the development. And then I'm going to take it right the way through to what is known as the golden age of detective fiction, which is the age of Agatha Christie and the period of the writers who were writing just before the Second World War, by which time the fictional English detective had finally arrived.
So many great learnings and so many fun things to think about with all of these detective novels and amazing mystery authors. So thank you so much for sharing all of that and being here
Oh,
with
it's a
us
great
today.
pleasure, a great pleasure.
We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about all of these projects, including the podcast and the Anthony Berkeley titles. And thank you so much to Naxos AudioBooks for helping to create this episode. David, it's been an amazing ride here with you.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for asking me to talk about my favorite subject.
And for all our listeners, be sure to visit AudioFile's website for reviews and sound clips from thousands of audiobooks, including Malice Aforethought, The Piccadilly Murder, and Trial and Error by Anthony Berkeley, narrated by David Timson himself. And please take a moment to rate and review this podcast so you can help others to find us. Thanks for listening.